The air inside the 47th floor of Drake Industries was suffocating. The crystal chandelier flickered above a long mahogany table where power, fear, and betrayal collided. Cameras that once blinked red were now dark. The doors had locked themselves with a sharp metallic click that echoed like a death sentence. At the center sat Evelyn Drake, 34, a woman whose calm elegance hid a storm. The so-called board meeting had turned into a trap. Around her, the men who once praised her vision now pushed a thick contract across the table. It wasn't business, it was an execution. "Sign it," Richard Cain demanded, his smile razor-thin. Every eye in the room followed Evelyn's trembling hand as she stared at the pen lying before her. The weight of her company, her father's legacy, and her entire future pressing down on her shoulders. For a moment, the only sound was her heartbeat pounding against the silence. Then came the realization that this was no negotiation. It was a corporate coup, and she was the target. Down in the lobby, Logan Hayes adjusted the cuff of his black uniform and watched the elevator lights climb toward the 47th floor. Every instinct in his body told him something was wrong. He couldn't explain it, but the tension in the air felt familiar. The kind of tension that used to hang in the desert just before a firefight. 36 years old, former Navy SEAL, a widower, now reduced to a short-term security contract at Drake Industries. The world saw a man doing a simple job, but inside, Logan was still the soldier who had buried too many brothers and promised himself he would never arrive too late again. He checked his watch, 10:07 a.m. His daughter Sophie, 7 years old, was 2 floors below in the childcare center. She had kissed his cheek earlier, her small hand gripping his thumb. "Don't be late, Daddy." He had smiled then, promising he wouldn't. But even now, that promise burned in his chest. It wasn't just about picking her up on time. It was about keeping her safe in a world that had already taken too much from him. The radios on the security channel were strangely quiet. Too quiet. He noticed subtle details that others ignored. The new guard by the elevator wore a badge with the wrong font. Another man's earpiece wasn't company issue. And near the service corridor, the screws on the access panel bore fresh scratches. Tampered with. He crouched, pretending to tie his boot, and caught the faint hum of an unauthorized signal jammer. His gut tightened. Someone had cut the building's communications, cameras, microphones, emergency alerts, all blind. He straightened slowly, his mind switching from civilian calm to military precision. Upstairs, Evelyn Drake was in that meeting, the one he'd been told to ignore. Corporate matters, they said, none of security's concern. But Logan had learned long ago that evil doesn't always wear a mask or carry a weapon. Sometimes it wears an expensive suit and speaks with a smile. He walked toward the security control room, scanning the feeds. Half the monitors were dead. The remaining few looped the same static image. The technicians were on break. No one had authorized that. Logan exhaled through his nose, low and steady. Every sense sharpened. His pulse slowed to the rhythm of training that never truly left him. For a moment, his reflection stared back from the glass panel. Tired eyes, faint scars at the temple. The face of a man trying to live quietly but never truly escaping the noise of his past. Afghanistan, the dust, the sound of a helicopter that never came. He forced the memories away. This wasn't war. Not yet. And then, in the flicker of a broken monitor, he saw it. The conference room camera blinked once before cutting out completely. The last frame showed Evelyn Drake surrounded by men, her expression frozen between defiance and fear. Logan's hand moved instinctively to his radio, but the static answered him back. The building was sealed from within. He could almost hear his commander's voice in his head. Never leave the weak undefended. He knew what that meant. Whatever was happening up there wasn't just business. It was an ambush in a suit and tie, and this time, he was the only one left to stop it. While Logan's instincts sharpened below, the real spider sat in his web above. Richard Cain, 40, tall, immaculate, a smile too perfect to trust. His reflection in the glass walls of the boardroom looked like power itself, but behind those calm eyes lived something colder, a man who had spent 18 months engineering the fall of Evelyn Drake. Every move was calculated. He had bought the guards, replaced the loyal ones with hired muscle that looked official but answered only to him. He had planted a corporate attorney, Philip Graves, a man whose handshake was as empty as his soul. Through Graves, Cain rewrote clauses, changed bylaws, buried traps and contracts that even Evelyn couldn't see coming. And then came Melissa Crane, the CFO who flowed wherever power flowed. Cain never trusted her, but he didn't need to. He only needed her fear of losing status to keep her in line. Together they formed the perfect illusion, a board meeting disguised as routine business, while in truth it was the execution of a hostile takeover. The chip he installed in the boardroom table was the masterpiece. No one knew that every sound, every whisper, was feeding into his private server. Cameras off, mics off, but his devices recorded everything. He liked control. He liked watching people break. Cain's plan was elegant in its cruelty. Force Evelyn to sign over control of Drake Industries, then sell its clean energy technology to an offshore conglomerate for a sum that could buy silence in every courtroom in the country. By the time anyone discovered the fraud, he would be untouchable. Now, as Evelyn's voice trembled under the pressure of his words, Cain sat back in his chair with the quiet satisfaction of a man who believed victory was already his. He could almost taste it, the downfall of the woman who had dared to stand against corruption, the end of her father's legacy, the crown finally within reach. But there was something he didn't know. Down below, a man named Logan Hayes had already seen through the cracks of his perfect plan, and when their worlds collided, one truth would shatter them both. You can't control chaos when chaos wears a soldier's face. The control room was silent except for the faint buzz of static. Logan stared at the monitors, the cold glow reflecting off his face. Something was terribly wrong. He leaned closer to one of the screens and noticed that a guard's badge number didn't match the official roster. The font was slightly off, too sharp, too new. His pulse slowed as his instincts took over. He checked the next feed. A man at the west elevator wore an earpiece from a different manufacturer. Then, near the maintenance hall, a small metal box blinked twice before going dark. It was subtle, but to a trained soldier, it screamed one thing: interference. Logan walked toward the source. The hallway was quiet, the air thick. He crouched beside the panel and unscrewed the metal cover. Inside, wires had been cut and reconnected. Someone had installed a signal jammer. That meant the building's communication lines, emergency alerts, even security cameras were useless. He stood still, breathing through the tension. Upstairs, Evelyn Drake was alone in that meeting. She didn't know her every exit had already been sealed. He opened the security logs on his tablet. Lines of code scrolled across the screen, but one entry froze his blood. A new administrator login had been created at 2:17 a.m., long before anyone arrived that morning. Whoever set this up had planned it down to the minute. He looked at the childcare camera next. Sophie was safe, sitting cross-legged on the carpet, reading to other kids. For now. He clenched his jaw. A memory rising uninvited. Kandahar. A dust storm swallowing the horizon. The mission that went wrong because they waited too long. His team was supposed to extract a captured medic. The delay cost 6 lives. Logan had carried that failure every day since. Now, as he stared at the blacked-out monitors, that same cold feeling returned. The silence before the explosion. The stillness before everything breaks. He swiped open the map of the executive floor. The boardroom's feed was gone, replaced by static. The jammer had isolated it completely. No cameras, no sound. But in the corner of one frame, just before the screen died, he caught a glimpse of Evelyn surrounded by men in suits. Her lips moved, but there was no sound. Her eyes, though, said everything. Logan's decision came without thought. He grabbed his access card, a small toolkit, and the override codes he wasn't supposed to use. The plan forming in his mind wasn't company protocol, it was survival instinct. As he stepped into the elevator, he whispered to himself, "Not again." The doors closed, sealing him inside as the floor numbers began to climb. He was no longer a security guard. He was a soldier again. And upstairs, the enemy didn't even know he was coming. The elevator stopped at the 47th floor with a metallic sigh. Logan stepped out, his pulse steady, his mind locked in combat focus. The quiet was unnatural. Every sound, every breath in the hallway felt like it belonged to someone waiting to strike. He moved down the corridor, scanning for movement. The walls were lined with frosted glass panels, and from behind, one of them came the faint murmur of voices. The boardroom. He could hear Richard Cain's smooth tone, confident and poisonous. Inside, Evelyn sat motionless. Her red pen hovered above the contract, her name already printed in the signature line. Around her, the men leaned forward like vultures closing in. "Sign it, Evelyn," Cain said softly. Each word dipped in arrogance. "It's for the good of the company." Logan's hand tightened around the access panel. He had memorized every emergency override code on his first day. He wasn't supposed to use them without authorization, but nothing about what was happening now was authorized. He entered the sequence on the keypad. Red light, denied. He tried again, faster this time. Green light, a soft click. Inside the room, Cain's tone sharpened. "You've had your chance. Sign it now." Evelyn's voice trembled but didn't break. "You don't have the authority to demand that." "Authority?" Cain laughed. "I am the authority." That was the moment the door exploded open. The heavy oak panels slammed against the walls, the echo slicing through the boardroom like a gunshot. Papers flew, coffee spilled, and every head snapped toward the doorway. Logan confronted Cain, asserting command and demanding respect for Evelyn. Tension filled the room, shifting power dynamics as chaos erupted. Logan remained unyielding, demonstrating he was a force to be reckoned with. For a moment, no one dared to breathe. The air inside the boardroom was frozen, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Logan's words still echoed, heavy and final. "Hands off the lady." Richard Cain was the first to recover. His smirk returned, but his voice wavered just enough for everyone to hear the crack beneath his calm. "You're out of line. Mr. Hayes, this is a private meeting. Security guards are not invited." Logan ignored him completely. He stepped forward, calm and deliberate, and placed his phone on the table. The screen came alive with images and data logs. "This building's security has been compromised. Cameras were disabled manually. Unauthorized access was detected at 2:17 this morning. Someone hacked your R&D servers and planted signal jammers in 3 locations." Evelyn straightened in her seat. The tremor in her hands vanished. She saw what Logan was doing. He was giving her an opening, a legal one. "Under Corporate Law Section 42, she said clearly, her voice cutting through the silence. "Any meeting held under duress or security compromise must be suspended until a full review is completed." Murmurs erupted around the table. Margaret Doyle adjusted her glasses and nodded slowly. "She's right. Those are standard compliance rules." Philip Graves, the company's internal lawyer, forced a laugh. "This is absurd. Temporary technical difficulties do not justify a suspension. You're letting a security officer dictate corporate procedure?" Logan didn't even look at him. He tapped another file, and a set of high-resolution photos appeared on the presentation screen. Wires spliced, devices hidden behind panels, timestamps recorded. "Technical difficulties don't install hardware that reroutes network signals, and they don't log in at 2:17 under an administrator account that belongs to Philip Graves." The room exploded into chaos. Voices clashed, chairs scraped. Melissa Crane's hand flew to her mouth. Ethan Park, the young IT engineer, shot up from his seat. "He's right," he said, pulling his tablet closer. "I checked that same login earlier this week. The MAC address matches your laptop. Mr. Graves." Philip's face drained of color. "You're misinterpreting the data. That was an internal audit. An audit that downloaded the entire R&D database." Ethan snapped. At 2:17 in the morning, Evelyn's eyes met Logan's. For the first time since the meeting began, she wasn't alone. Margaret Doyle's voice carried authority. "Until we verify this breach, this meeting is suspended effective immediately." Richard Cain slammed his hand on the table. "You can't suspend me." But the balance had shifted. Melissa Crane, once silent, spoke softly. If there's evidence of stolen data, we're all at risk. I support suspension. The tension snapped like glass. Power no longer sat in Cain's hands. It flowed toward Evelyn, who stood taller now, her fear replaced by controlled fire. Logan said nothing. He simply watched the man across the table, the one who thought he controlled everything, realize that his perfect plan was beginning to crumble. And somewhere deep inside him, Logan knew this was only the beginning. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Philip Graves slumped in his chair, sweat glistening on his temples. Melissa avoided his eyes. Ethan kept typing, pulling up data to support the investigation. Evelyn was moments away from calling the suspension vote when Richard Cain, in one final attempt to seize control, smiled. It wasn't the confident smile of a man in power. It was something darker. He reached for his phone, swiping across the screen with slow precision. "You think you've won," he said quietly, "but you've forgotten something." The wall monitor flickered back to life. A new image appeared, grainy but unmistakable. A small girl with chestnut hair sitting cross-legged in a colorful room, surrounded by books and toys. Sophie Hayes. Evelyn froze. Logan's chest constricted as if the air had been ripped from the room. "She's adorable," Cain murmured, his tone dripping with malice. "It would be a shame if something happened to her. Accidents occur in buildings this large all the time. Fire alarms, gas leaks, misplaced security keys. You'd be amazed how fragile safety can be." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Logan's vision tunneled, his instincts screaming for action, his muscles tensed, ready to strike. But the years of training held him still. One wrong move and he would confirm Cain's story that he was the violent one. Evelyn glanced at him. She saw the war raging behind his eyes, the soldier fighting to stay calm. Without breaking her composure, she reached for her phone and dialed a number from memory. "Laura," she said firmly, her voice steady, "we have a Code 7 situation. The target is a child in the daycare facility. Name, Sophie Hayes. Secure her immediately. Use full lockdown protocol." Logan's head snapped toward her. The name hit him hard. Laura Bennett. He remembered it from his service days. Her husband, Michael Bennett, had been a Navy SEAL from another unit. A good man who never came home. Cain narrowed his eyes. And who exactly is she calling? Evelyn met his gaze with unshakable calm. "The head of building security," she said. "Widow of a SEAL. Someone who knows what it means to protect a warrior's family." For the first time, Cain looked uncertain. The phone buzzed on the table. Logan picked it up. A message flashed across the screen. "Package secure. 2 attempted intrusions neutralized. Local law enforcement notified." Relief washed over him, but he didn't show it. He kept his expression cold, unreadable. Cain's smirk faltered. "You can't touch me," he hissed. Evelyn's voice cut through his bravado. "You just added criminal threatening to your list of charges, Mr. Cain. I'd call that touching you quite enough." The boardroom fell silent again, but this time the silence belonged to Evelyn and Logan. The predators had lost their grip. Logan looked at Evelyn, understanding dawning in his eyes. She wasn't just a CEO fighting for her company. She was someone who understood loyalty, sacrifice, and the silent code of soldiers. For the first time in a long while, he realized he wasn't fighting alone. And outside that room, a child named Sophie was now under the protection of a woman who carried the same kind of strength that lived in her father's blood. But neither of them knew yet that this victory had just opened the door to a much bigger storm. The message from Laura appeared on Logan's phone. "Package secure. 2 intruders contained. FBI en route." He read it twice, then looked up at Richard Cain. The man's smirk was gone. Sweat glistened at his hairline as he watched Logan calmly plug his phone into the boardroom console. The giant screen behind Evelyn came to life. Dozens of security feeds blinked on one by one. The boardroom gasped as the evidence unfolded in real time. Footage of guards being replaced, timestamps of unauthorized logins, video of hidden devices being installed, and files labeled with offshore accounts. Every secret Cain thought he had buried was suddenly laid bare. Logan's voice was steady. Everything you've done has been recorded and uploaded to the Federal Archive. There's no erasing it now." Evelyn stepped forward, her tone firm but composed. "Richard Cain, you are officially removed from any position of authority pending criminal investigation. Philip Graves, the same applies to you." Fake Cain's jaw tightened. "You don't have the power to do that." Margaret Doyle stood, her years of leadership giving her words gravity. "She does. And this board will now vote to make it official." Ethan Park projected the audit data on another screen. "The financial trail leads directly to accounts registered in the Cayman Islands, linked to shell companies controlled by Cain and Graves." Melissa Crane's voice shook as she spoke. "I confirm those transfers. I signed off on them without knowing their destination." Cain slammed his fist on the table. "You'll regret this. All of you." Evelyn didn't flinch. "No. Richard, you will?" Before he could reply, a sharp sound broke through the click of the main door unlocking. Agents in Navy windbreakers flooded in, the golden letters FBI bright under the overhead light. Their movements were precise, their tone clipped and professional. "Richard Cain, Philip Graves, you are under arrest for conspiracy, wire fraud, and corporate espionage." The room erupted into whispers. Cain's bravado crumbled as two agents pulled his arms behind him, snapping the cuffs into place. Graves tried to protest, but the evidence on the screen was undeniable. Logan stood still, watching silently as justice unfolded. Evelyn met his eyes briefly. Gratitude flickered there, unspoken but unmistakable. Margaret took control once more. "This meeting will continue for one purpose only, to restore order." She looked around the table. "All in favor of removing Cain and Graves from the board permanently?" Every hand rose. The motion passed without a word of dissent. "And in recognition of her leadership under duress," Margaret continued, "I move to reaffirm Evelyn Drake as Chief Executive Officer of Drake Industries." The vote was unanimous. Evelyn exhaled, relieved yet aware of impending headlines. Logan's mission seemed complete as their unspoken connection hinted at deeper unfolding stories. The boardroom had turned into a flurry of reporters, agents, and voices trying to make sense of what had just happened. But Logan Hayes wanted none of it. While others argued over statements and legal forms, he simply walked toward the elevator, the hum of chaos fading behind him. His steps were quiet, steady. Every movement carried the exhaustion of a man who had been running from his past and had just faced it head-on. He didn't care about headlines or gratitude. He cared about one thing: getting back to Sophie. As the elevator doors began to close, a voice called out, "Logan, wait!" He turned. Evelyn Drake hurried toward him, her red dress catching the last light from the boardroom. She looked different now. The armor of the CEO was gone. In her eyes there was gratitude, strength, and something else: understanding. "You're just leaving?" she asked. Breath catching slightly, Logan nodded once. "My job's done." She stepped closer. "Your job saved more than a company today. You saved lives. You stopped corruption that would have destroyed everything my father built." He shook his head. "You did that. I just opened a door." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Then maybe you should stay to make sure no one closes it again." He frowned slightly, not following. "I need a new head of security," she said, her tone soft but certain. "Someone I can trust completely. Someone who protects people, not just property." For a moment, Logan said nothing. The idea of staying, the idea of building something stable again felt foreign. His life had been motion and loss for too long. "You don't want someone like me," he said quietly. "I don't fit boardrooms." Evelyn met his gaze. "You fit integrity. That's what this company needs now." The elevator chimed softly behind him, a reminder that he could still walk away. But instead, he looked at her and saw not a corporate leader, but a woman who had stood her ground when everyone else fled. The same kind of courage he'd once seen in soldiers. Logan shares a moment with Evelyn, acknowledging honor's value as he embraces a new beginning, inspired by his daughter, Sophie. The hallway outside the daycare center was quiet except for the soft hum of morning sunlight seeping through the tall windows. The chaos of the boardroom felt like a lifetime ago. Logan Hayes walked slowly, the adrenaline finally fading, replaced by the warm ache of relief. Every step reminded him what truly mattered: Not the headlines, not the company. The small voice that would call his name the moment he opened that door. Inside the reading room, a circle of children sat cross-legged on the carpet. In the middle, Sophie Hayes held a storybook, her little hands waving as she read aloud with dramatic expression. And then, she said, eyes wide, the brave sailor looked into the storm and said, "I'm not afraid." The other children gasped, their faces glowing with excitement. Logan leaned against the doorframe, watching quietly. His chest tightened, not with fear this time, but pride. The same courage that once guided him through combat now lived in his daughter's voice. She had his steadiness, his instinct to protect, yet she also had something he had nearly lost, the pure belief that good can still win. One of the teachers noticed him and smiled. "Looks like we have a proud dad," she whispered. Sophie turned her head. The moment she saw him, the book slipped from her hands. "Daddy!" She ran into his arms, hugging him with all the strength her little body could hold. He lifted her easily, pressing a kiss to her forehead. For the first time in years, he felt whole. "You were brave today," he said softly. "You kept everyone calm. You helped them, didn't you?" Sophie nodded, her eyes bright. "You always said that's what heroes do." Logan smiled. "You remembered." "Of course," she said with a grin. "I'm your daughter." A gentle voice came from behind them. "She really is extraordinary." Logan turned. Evelyn Drake stood by the door, now barefoot, her red heels dangling from one hand. The woman who had faced down corporate betrayal and stared into fear itself suddenly looked more human, more real. The sunlight from the window touched her hair, softening her features. "I didn't mean to interrupt," she said, stepping closer. "But I think this belongs to Sophie." In her hands was a beautifully illustrated book, its cover painted in shades of blue and gold. The title shimmered softly in the light. "The Deep Sea Explorers." Evelyn knelt in front of Sophie and handed it to her. "It's about the bravest explorers in the ocean," she explained. "They face darkness and danger, but they keep going because they believe there's beauty waiting in the deep. I thought you might like it." Sophie received the book respectfully, inviting Miss Evelyn to read together. They sensed shared understanding about courage. News revealed a conspiracy at Drake Industries, with Evelyn praised for her leadership, inspiring discussions on heroism, hope, and future strength.